Welcome to Deceleration, deceleration.news, an online journal responding to our shared ecological, political, and cultural crises. Deceleration is dedicated to seeking out the roots of human and planetary insecurity and moving beyond mere resistance and into the realization of a just and sustainable peace. This week's podcast, 1.5 is the story. At the conclusion of the Paris Climate Conference in 2015, virtually every country on Earth agreed to work together to hold global warming, quote, well below 2 degrees Celsius, or for most of y'all listening, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. This goal was chosen somewhat arbitrarily as this point where we could still stave off the most destructive manifestations of our climate crisis. While the Paris framework also considered 1.5 degrees as aspirational, increasingly cities are declaring 1.5 their goal right out of the gate. San Antonio planners, now developing the city's first ever climate action plan, are no longer developing two possible paths for council consideration in the spring as they had been. Instead, at the direction of the mayor's office, 1.5 here will be the number to meet. The success or failure of this movement from less than 2 to 1.5 or perhaps less, is life or death for many of the world's low-lying island states, representatives of which pushed back hard on the 2-degree Paris proposal, insisting that they needed, quote, 1.5 to stay alive. Regrettably, given the limited action by the world's largest economies to date, the world is well on the way to blow past all of these targets. A leaked IPCC report reportedly suggests that the world may see 1.5 rise by 2040. And while no one on Earth will be untouched by the consequences of a hotter and more violent climate, for the millions of the world's island inhabitants, there may be no adapting. In this space between 1.5 and 2, entire island states are in play. To consider what that means on the ground, I spoke with Ursula Rakova, Executive Director of Tulele, Peisa, a nonprofit formed by the elders of the Carteret Islands to direct the relocation of their communities from the low-lying island chain to the big island of Bougainville in Papau New Guinea. I'd communicated with Rakova electronically off and on since first writing about climate migration and the Carterets in 2014, but this was my first opportunity to speak with her directly. Here, Rakova speaks of the necessity for local communities to be able to direct their own climate responses. She talks about why, in spite of the reality of the ongoing forced relocation among her own people, that she dislikes terms like refugee and victim. And we talk about the practical needs for Carteret Islanders. These include technological or business assistance in establishing value-added products at their small cocoa farms and investment in renewable energy infrastructure to power operations in these new communities. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
It's been a little while, and I think since we spoke last, and I know you had begun the process of relocating your community. Now, how many people on the Carteret Atoll, the islands, are being? Are you trying to move to the big island, Bougainville?
We have only managed to move 10 families to our first site. And we need to move into our second site, but financial support from the Bougainville government is quite slow. Mm-hmm. And of course, in Papua New Guinea, forward to the APEC meeting, which happens next month, November. And so there is actually a lot of excitement, and money has been diverted to funding the APEC. That's why a lot of the activities that should be funded communities are not being supported right now.
Mm-hmm. I missed that last part. The line kind of went out. I know you were saying that the money was difficult to come from Bougainville, but there was maybe some other opportunities.
Yes, like what I'm saying is that there is a big APEC meeting
Okay.
that's coming on in Papua New Guinea in November.
And APEC, can
And
you
so a
define
lot of
that?
the funds, sorry,
APEC
a
is.
lot of the APEC meeting, the um,
Uh-huh.
Asia Pacific Economic Community meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, will be held here in Mosby, in Port Moresby. And so much of the funding from the government is being diverted into making sure the leaders are well treated and that they have their meeting in good places. And so much of the community activities are not being supported right now.
Now, I know folks listening who will hear this interview are not going to be familiar with your experience and the experience on the Carteret Islands there. If I remember correctly
Yes.
from our last conversation, I mean, you are on a very low-lying island, atoll. You're experiencing the encroachment of more salty water into your fresh water that allows you to do some farming, some gardening. The king tides, the oceans have been higher, and so they're overwashing the island more. How would you describe the experience these last 20
Yeah.
years or so?
Greg, the situation is really bad. I mean, the islands will continue to be there, but when we look at food, sustainably growing food to feed families, there is less production that is being harvested by the islanders, and so there is more dependency on store foods. And
Imports.
when people depend more on store foods, there are also diseases that the community is now coming face to face with. There is an increase in high blood pressure patients. There is an increase in malaria patients, and there is also an increase in diabetic patients because of the nutrition, the lack of nutrition being taken by islanders.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. That probably would not jump top of mind for a lot of people, but there is a big change from when you're eating local, familiar food, healthier food. Obviously, there would be a big change when it's coming out of a package and it's coming from outside of, areas and places that diets like here. I know a big shift that's happened over the last couple of hundred years is indigenous and native people, where there was obviously an attempt to eradicate them from where I live, but when Europeans came, they brought flour instead of corn, for instance, and there were certain kinds of foods that they were used to, but others were not, and it created a lot of hardship in terms of I think public health. So that's an interesting part of this story. And I know you had begun. We referenced this earlier, but you've been really pivotal and have been recognized as a climate wise woman. And part of this program emphasizing the role of local action and women in action around the world responding to climate change. And I'm wondering if very briefly you can describe how this process of relocation came about and what your ultimate hope is, because I know, if I recall correctly, part of this includes also, not being called refugees or not being dependent on other people and losing your rights and your ability to develop in the ways that you feel your community should develop. Is that correct?
That is correct, Greg. We do not want to be called climate refugees because we are not running away from a civil war. we are basically relocating to save areas because of impacts of climate change. Something that we have not caused, but we basically becoming victims, falling victims to this. But we also do not want to be seen as victims. We want to be seen as a community, learning new skills, especially in terms of agriculture, new gardening skills, so that we are able to sustain ourselves. And the when we go back to the to our initial stages of relocating, this was an initiative by the Council of Elders and Chiefs of the island, where they wanted to build a more sustainable community instead of a community that's relying on support from outside.
Yeah, it's a really powerful story, and I think it is a good corrective for the way people often think about these issues, because I think, particularly here in the States, we look at examples. Well, we only really see these stories, and kind of, every once in a while there's a sensational story about the power of climate change at Ryman seas and driving people away from their homes, or we see the protests out of a international climate summit where low-lying island states have a very prominent position, but we don't have the analysis about, well, what does this mean for the people who are living there, and how are they using their power to work to solve their issues. And so I know one thing that you have tapped into is growing cacao, and that is you've established, I believe, some farms on Bougainville. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have about 14 farms. And those 14 farms are cocoa farms, as well as coconut farms. And we do have a dryer where we are drying cocoa beans and selling them outside or even locally as well.
Now, do you have access, though? I know this has been an issue for growers who don't have real-time market data. They can be taken advantage of by buyers and be sold. Do you have access to good data? Do you feel like you have are you getting fair purchase prices?
No, we feel we are not having a fair representation where we can export our beans, our dried cocoa beans, to overseas markets, and we would like those avenues to be made accessible to us. Last weeks ago there was a cocoa festival, a chocolate festival they called it, and every year it happens in Bougainville.
Oh, okay.
But I don't see any big chocolate companies coming to attend. It's always the small chocolatiers, and a lot of dried cocoa beans are exported overseas. And like, as much as I appreciate the niche markets, I would also like to see the volume of Bougainville cocoa being exported outside. And if we have like a huge volume, we should also be adding value to the product, like downstream processing, and that we are producing cocoa butter and cocoa powder.
So this would be kind of an opportunity maybe for those who are in the business or looking for ways to be of an assistance that have kind of that background, would be able to reach out to you directly. And I know I'll share your contact information at the end of the interview. So potentially, folks, you can connect and start looking at ways to develop, more value-added production. In relation to, and I know you said this relocation is gone somewhat slowly. There's a lot of, the IPCC is talking about, bringing out their new report, and folks are fairly pessimistic about, being able to reach this 1.5 degree of warming. And if that is the case, obviously, a lot of low-lying island states will simply be no more. What are the conversations that you have had with others, maybe in the Maldives or elsewhere, about that reality?
I upload the IPCC report on 1.5% cut of emissions. My concern is that as much as other states and nations are talking about emissions cut, there are communities like ours already facing severe impact. And shoreline erosion, and what do we do with these communities? It's not just the Carteret, it's also the Kiribati, the Tulele, Maldives, Bangladesh. The delta is being destroyed. What happens to these displaced communities? What do we do with them? I think we need to look at it in a twofold situation. We look at the emissions cut, but we should also look at financing communities that are already facing severe impacts of climate change.
Right. I wanted to ask you about that also, because it can be tricky for folks to think, to the language, say, well, we don't want to use refugee language, but we do want to communicate the urgency of people being displaced from their homes and their communities. And I think the numbers are high, and we can get lost in numbers and forget faces too. But you had mentioned, potentially, being in Alaska and meeting communities there who, obviously, we've seen villages drop into the sea. So when it comes to for let's say, you can say the United States, a very wealthy country which is wrapped up in a deep and violent debate over not just the nature of climate change, but this resistance to in any way admitting its culpability as a young industrial, young relatively, right, industrial power that's emitted most of the, along with Western Europe, most of the climate pollution historically. This idea of a green climate fund. Something like it has to move forward. We need, global governance, international cooperation, working to, as you say, assist those who have already and are being today displaced, moved from their homes. How do you and those that you organize with speak to these kinds of issues in terms of, those who are historically have such massive debt to the rest of the world, and those that they are impacting?
We do not want to be called climate refuge, because we would like to move with our dignity as well. And having said that, for us in the Carteret, we are fortunate to have Bougainville as a bigger island that we can move to. Mm-hmm. But what happens to smaller nations, island nations like the Kiribati, the Tuvaluans, they do not have those bigger islands to move to.
Right.
But there are countries like New Zealand and Australia who are neighbors to these smaller nations. Are they going to look at developing policies where they can begin to accept these people into their countries or not?
Now, there have been some.
And that's a big question.
Right. I know there have been applications made in Australia for relocation based upon climate displacement, and this was a couple of years ago, but I believe they were rejected. Is that correct?
Yeah, because I mean, when we look back at climate change impacts, and then some 2 years ago, there were asylum seekers dumped here in Papua New Guinea, as if Papua New Guinea does not have an issue of climate displacement peoples already on its hands. So this is tripling the issue of relocation for other communities in Papua New Guinea as well. I mean, Manus Island is an island province that's also facing climate change impacts.
We're losing your signal a little bit.
Yeah, I'm also
That's better.
Your voice is coming on and off as well.
Okay, that's better right there. Well, let me ask you while we have a connection. What is interesting, I think, climate-wise women in the movement around that, in recognizing folks like yourself and women from around the world who are obviously also the most impacted. We forget this sometimes, that women tend to suffer the most under extreme weather, under climate change, under forced relocation, or in refugee camps, or whatever, in war and conflict. How did you yourself develop into such a leadership position, and why is it important that people understand your story and the stories of others in terms of of gender, of women and having power?
I come from a matriarchal society where women hold land in trust for future generations, and coming from a matriarchal society has actually encouraged me to help in the way that I could. And when the elders and chiefs approached for us to get organized and to help in moving some people, obligation to help, because I work in a long while with other NGOs in Papua New Guinea, and I felt it was time for me to help my own people this way.
And what was it like meeting other women from so many other communities who were doing similar work, coming from not matriarchal societies?
When I met some of the women in New York in 2009, it actually encouraged me to that there were also women out there who were doing similar work to the work I was doing, and this is why we co-founded the Climate Wise Women, and I feel that Climate Wise Women generally focuses on women who are already doing little things in their own communities and trying to help their community prosper beyond being victims of climate change. In these Climate Wise Women, we have some women from Africa, from the Pacific, from Australia, and even the United States as well. So all these women share common values of helping and trying to help out in any possible way they can. And as a group, they share their experiences, and with these experiences, they take learnings and try to apply those learnings in their own communities. And of course, the climate-wise women focuses on women who are actually doing so much to help themselves, but it advocates for them internationally as well. And while advocating for the work of these women in their own communities, it attracts bits and pieces or small funding from foundations who are willing to help to continue the work of these women in their own communities. So I actually applaud the work of Tracy Mann, who is coordinating this climate-wise women, because she plays a big role in helping to get foundations to support the work of these women.
And how has, I know there's been some serious weather in that part of the world, and I'm wondering how have you and those at Tuvalu or Carteret or Bougainville fared?
I have met women from Tuvalu in some of the UN meetings, and what they are trying to do in their own communities is to build adaptation projects, especially in Kiribati and Tuvalu, and they do not want to move, but they do want governments to support and help them build sea breakers around their islands, which is going to be more expensive, but I think they deserve to be supported financially. And I think there should be more sharing between the Pacific Islanders, where they can share ideas and take whatever learning they can take. And the meeting that's going on in Anchorage in Alaska, involving Pacific Island communities and Alaskan communities sharing their experiences about climate displacement and relocation, is a good avenue for such sharing to go ahead. And I would encourage this kind of sharing and learnings to continue to take place, where communities impacted by climate change begin to lead the way into finding their own solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wasn't familiar with that gathering, so I'll have to check that. I know that one thing here in the U.S., we just had the Global Action conference out in San Francisco, and there were folks here from San Antonio that went out. Well, some were inside on the panels and some were outside protesting, but I think the message overall that I heard back was that whether from an institutional perspective or from an activist perspective, that the answers that folks are looking for, the nation states, the international community broadly, aren't delivering. And so the solutions have to be locally driven. They need to come from the bottom up and in these regional networks and solidarity. And it sounds very much like what you're describing is what people here are also hearing.
I think it will be the way out into mitigating climate change, and communities on the ground have to lead the way. And it's doing action now that matters most, and that will matter in the next with the next generation. The other thing I also would like to emphasize here is that local solutions are vital in the sense that people know what they want and people know what they need. But they need to be supported in those initiatives by financial institutions like the Climate Investment Fund or the Green Climate Fund.
Right.
Communities need to be accessing these funds. But at the moment, I'm not sure if a single community is accessing any of that funding.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. And I know that the funding has been far less than what was originally pledged. I know at least from the U.S. and where it's going, how they're determining, who qualifies. Those are huge issues. So something to be watching and advocating around, because there is definitely, that was the idea I was hinting at, is that there are these legacies and historical debts that and just simply it's the right thing to do, right? So that's well noted. Ursula, do you have closings, anything that we haven't covered in this conversation that you would want to add?
Yeah, Greg, I'd just like to add one more little thing here. I feel that communities need to be supported with clean development energy, and in places like the Carteret, Tuvalu, Kiribati, where you don't need to purchase the heat from the sun. Solar and windmills are appropriately clean development mechanisms, so eco projects such as those will go a long way into helping these communities find their own and sustain their own livelihoods.
Ursula Rakova, there's a lot of respect and appreciation for your work, I know, around the world, and I want to offer mine as well. And I look forward to our next conversation. I wish you well in all of your work.
Thank you, Greg, and nice sharing this interview with you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Deceleration is a joint effort of myself and my wonderful partner, Marisol Cortez, and we blog, write, every once in a while at deceleration.news, and every once in a while throw out one of these podcasts. But we'll be trying to do a little bit more as San Antonio pushes through with his climate plan. A great opportunity for community dialogue. See you next time.